Hey guys, welcome back, it's Ripe again. In today's video, my incredibly toxic parents treated me like trash for 20 years, and after I ended up being successful, they returned and demanded I give my house to my useless sister. Here is what happened. Let's dive right into the relationship story. Most of the people reading this will have heard that it can be tough to grow up with siblings. Some might even have heard that it can be amazing to grow up with siblings. I suppose it all really depends on who the parents are and how they treat their children. My parents were not exactly the best. I've always known that they were disappointed that their first child, me, was a boy, as they had really hoped for a girl, so when my sister was born a couple years later, they were over the moon and showered all their love and affection on her, and I became a second-class citizen, so to say. Obviously, I never really noticed this being a toddler and all, but a few years went by and something finally clicked when I was having my 6th birthday and my parents insisted that my sister got to blow out my candles as she was getting very upset. I thought that it should not matter as it was my birthday and not hers. I did not understand what was going on. I know now though, it was favoritism. Soon my birthdays practically became my sister's second birthday, as our parents would even go so far as to buy her presents, let her invite her friends to my party. By the time I was 10, I might as well not have had a birthday to begin with. It was not just birthdays either, but everything I did. All my accomplishments somehow meant that my sister got all the love and praise instead. All the great things I did was overshadowed by my sister in some shape or form. When my school year went on the annual trip for my year, my parents booked a holiday and took my sister to Hawaii. When I would go to the next state over to play in a basketball competition, they would take my sister to the city to watch the Timberwolves play. Whenever I would get praised for doing great in my grades, my sister would get even more praise for her mediocre grades. Unsurprisingly, my sister developed a princess complex to rival all princess complexes. She was so selfish, she would have put any only child spoiled to within an inch of their lives to shame. She might as well have been the only child as far as the affection my parents showed me over her. Needless to say though, the very first opportunity I got to leave home, I was gone, and I'm pretty sure my parents did not even notice. If I could, I would have gone to a college on the other side of the country, but as it so happens, my parents had not saved up anywhere near enough money for me to go to any but the local community college, but I was lucky enough that a couple of my friends were also eager to leave home, so we pooled our resources and rented a nice enough place just off the college campus. It felt great to finally be out of that household where I could stretch out and be my own person without everything I do being undermined by my sister. I did not want to have to rely on my parents for anything, so I did all that I could to put myself in a financially stable position, and although investments don't seem like a great way to make a secure amount each month, if you're careful and listen to all the advice, you could easily make enough money to buy a house, which is exactly what I did when I finished college. I could not believe my luck. All the investments over time paid out, and while I did lose a bit of money at first, it all came around and was worth it in the end. Now don't get me wrong, this was no massive mansion in the posh part of town. There was nothing fancy about my first house. It was a cramped one-bedroom place that was practically everything in one room, but it had an upstairs for the bedroom and bathroom, and to me, that felt enough like a house, and I was on the property ladder. Naturally, my parents found out about it. I don't even know how, as I had not spoken to them in months. I would call them up now and then when I left home, just to check in and let them know that I was doing fine. I honestly don't think they cared that much, because as soon as the pleasantries were out of the way, they would then go on a massive tirade of what my sister had been up to, how her gymnastics were so good that she would be going to the Olympics soon, and so on. Again, I have no idea how they found out that I had bought a house not where I actually lived. They just turned up one Saturday afternoon and invited themselves in like they owned the place. Naturally, I was frustrated and already thinking of selling on and moving to a new place. They poked around my little home, muttered to one another, approving this or disproving that, making small affirmative noises to each other. Once they were done looking around, they just looked at one another and said, "This will do," and off they went. I tried to question them what they were even doing here, but they made some excuse about running late for an appointment and that they just wanted to see the house. It was very strange behavior, and it bugged me for days afterwards. Things became clear the following weekend when they showed up again, this time with my sister in tow. Once again, I had not invited them in, they just helped themselves. For nearly an hour, my sister complained about how pokey the house was, that she had hoped for something a little more spacious, and when I demanded to know what was going on, they told me that it didn't concern me and that I should butt out. A few days after this visit, my parents call around once more and tell me that my sister is gonna move into my house and that I needed to vacate by the weekend, which by the way was only 3 days. I told them not a chance, and if any of them come near my home, I will get the police involved. They tell me to stop acting so selfish and just leave. The next couple weeks are tough as my parents are constantly hounding me to give up my home for my sister. They even go so far as to tell me that I'm the older brother, it's my responsibility to give up what I have to look after my young sister. I tell them in probably the least polite way I've ever spoken to my parents to go screw themselves and that I never wanted to hear from them again. I hoped the message would finally get through to them, but I was nowhere near that lucky. A couple days later, I come home from work to find all my stuff out on the front porch. The house was small, so it didn't have a yard, but a small balcony porch. There's a guy in the middle of changing the locks too. How my parents got into my house in the first place is beyond me. All I can think is that they must have broken a window and just climbed in. I find my parents in the kitchen, moving things about for my sister, and my sister up in the bedroom, unpacking her stuff. I'm so furious that I don't even say anything to them, I just walk outside and call the police. When they come, my parents don't even realize the situation they are in, and casually try to explain to the officer that I am their son and that the house belongs to them through me, to which they are giving it to my sister. I couldn't believe the gall of it all, as if this was just another Sunday to them. Once the officers were done talking to my parents and my sister, the officer sympathizes with me a little and asks me what I want to do about it. I ask him if I'm able to have them arrested for trespassing or something, to which the officer tells me that just because they are family, it doesn't mean that I cannot charge them with full-on breaking and entry, squatting, trespass, and a whole slew of other things. I had the biggest grin on my face and I said yes to absolutely everything and pressed charges and then laughed non-stop as I watched my mom, father, and sister get carted away in handcuffs. Finally, vindication. I obviously had to lawyer up as this was going all the way to a court hearing with all the crap my family tried to pull. To which I was able to dredge up a whole lifetime of neglect and abuse. The judge's words, not mine. The neglect I could agree with, but the abuse sounded a bit far, but who am I to argue with a federal judge? In the end, they were fined a huge amount of money that I used to upgrade myself to a 2-bed semi, and they had a lifelong restraining order. But the best thing of all is that I was able to emancipate myself from them. Now whenever anyone asks me about my family, I just tell them I lost my family when I was just a little boy. And the next one is a revenge story and it is titled "Lie to Me and I Will Get Revenge." I thought I was in a slightly tumultuous but overall fun relationship for a year. I had gotten out of a 12-year relationship when I met F-Boy. He was so charming and handsome, I thought I won the lottery. He was super pushy about saying I love you first and defining our relationship. He introduced me to his family. His niece started calling me auntie. He tells me about his 3 children and their mothers and lies about how the mother of his oldest hates him and is keeping him away from the kid. But then things started getting weird. His ex started calling all the time, multiple times a day. They had children together, but the grandma had custody. The lie I was told to make it seem normal was that both of them had jobs where they traveled a lot, so they signed legal guardianship over to the grandma to make schooling and emergency issues easier. Then she moved down to the city we were living in for work training. Then she was moving down permanently without the kids. When I asked why the kids were not coming, the lie I was told they need to stay in the same school. They are 6 and 4. I would say staying with parents is more important at that age than their peer group. It was weird, but I'm the cool girlfriend and it was not my place to tell them where their daughters should live. His work was in the cannabis industry, kind of. He worked with the ex-brother-in-law going to legal states, buying pounds at a time and trafficking it via USPS. So when he tells me he's going to Oregon, I think nothing of it. After a week in Oregon, a lot of stories are not adding up, like his phone is always dead even though he carries a power bank with him, then one of his friends starts posting cuddled up selfies with him. I quickly put 2 and 2 together and dumped him for cheating on me with this chick in Oregon. Now on to the truth. After I dumped him, I made a messy Facebook post on his wall, which the mother of his oldest child sees, and she contacts me and lays out the truth. He never contacts his oldest daughter even though he has her cell phone, no one is keeping him from her. He owes around $20,000 in back child support for her, as he has never once made a payment, and he moves around a lot and works under the table, so the mother was never able to collect garnishments or anything. He has a huge criminal record, starting with RAPE, he committed at age 15, and then a lifetime of fraud, larceny and drug charges I knew nothing about. His ex, who moved to our city, was his girlfriend of 9 years, who was very much still in a relationship with him. They willingly gave up the 2 children because they preferred to use drugs, him heroin and her pills. There is a 4th child? Well, he and the mother conspired to pin the paternity on another poor sap, and it's been 17 years now that this other man has been paying for a kid that is not his. I was his side chick. His family knew and played along in the lie and included their 10 and 16-year-old children in the lie. His chick in Oregon is actually his star-crossed lover from childhood. And every time they would try to be together, one or the other would end up in jail. The Oregon chick also has criminal record highlights, include criminally negligent homicide from a DUI, where she killed her passenger, fraud, larceny and drug charges. This shocked me, so I paid for a criminal background check, which is how I learned of their records. Now for my revenge. I profusely thanked the ex for telling me the truth about the situation. I mulled on it for a bit, trying to convince myself to simply consider myself lucky and just walk away with my dignity intact. But then he would be winning, and I knew I had everything in my power to come down on him like Thor's hammer. I gave the ex all of his info, SSN, state IDs, current and past known addresses, and with this she contacted her state's child support services. He now will have his driver's license revoked and cannot get one no matter the state he moves to until he is current with his past payments. If he ever gets a real job, 25% of his wages will be garnished. He now has a warrant for his arrest in the state his oldest kid lives. He is trying to play house with his new girlfriend and contacted the mom of his oldest to arrange a meeting with his kid and his girlfriend's child. The mother is playing nice and pretending it's a go, and he is planning a trip to visit the daughter. However, he will not see her. At the meeting he will be seeing the police and they will arrest him for failure to pay, and he won't get out of jail until he pays a sizable chunk of the $20,000 past due plus bail. I gave the ex his info the day before his federal tax refund was set to go out. She was fast enough at getting his info to CSS that they intercepted his full tax refund, and now he has for the first time paid for something for his child. His past due child support is also going on his credit report. I know the name of the business his ex-brother-in-law owns and uses to launder his drug trafficking money. I dropped a dime to the IRS, so now he is losing his only steady income soon and cannot get a job at Walmart due to his criminal record, and if he does manage to find someone that hires without criminal background checks, he will still lose 1/4 of his paycheck every time. I told this story to 2 of my hacker friends and they got into contact with hackers more talented than themselves and are now going to take care of a few more things for me. For example, like finding the guy who was conned into paying for a kid that is not his. And yeah, ripe stars, I gotta say, this is one of the craziest revenge stories I've ever heard of. However, I gotta say, I'm happy that OP got revenge in the end. I bet that felt very satisfying. And the next one is titled Patent Revenge Done Right. So my father had a degree in mechanical engineering, either a master's or doctorate. It had taken him years to get it and he was very proud of that. Thanks to his training, he had found his way working for many well-known companies, working primarily with the procedures used to make various things. Over time, he would privately begin working on an idea that would revolutionize how school and gym lockers worked. See, my father realized that there was a problem with those type of metal lockers. Namely, it was very easy for a person to break into them. What's more, as the lockers were designed, there were multiple moving, exposed moving parts, which meant that if a student put too many books in one, or really anything got against the door, the locker could be jammed shut, making it near impossible to open it. So for several years, Dad toyed with a number of ideas before hitting on a new design which would solve all those problems. The inner workings of the locker's locking mechanism would be contained within the door in such a way that 1. It was impossible for someone to shim or break into, and 2. The entire mechanism would be enclosed, and 3. It was relatively maintenance-free. Now, at this point, my father was the vice president of manufacturing, and apparently there was not a clause in his contract that said if he designed anything while working for the company, then he had to turn that over to them for profit. Dad still approached the company offering them the design, but they were not interested. So my dad sat on the design for a while before eventually just taking out several patents on them and then forgetting about them. About 6 months after his first attempt at getting the company interested, the parent's company owner/chairman of the board passed away and the board opted to sell off some of the holdings. The company my dad worked for was part of that. The new owners were young guys who seemed to think they knew everything, as young business owners always seem to think, and they set about changing 99% of the way things were being done. At some point they stumbled across the plans my father had designed. Now that is where things turned curious. They really wanted to start producing this new design, but as they did not have all the plans and processes laid out for them, they had to turn to my father for answers. Rather than asking him how to do it or licensing the patents, as any reputable company would have done, they ordered him to turn over all his work or else they would fire him. Dad stood his ground and refused. The new owners and my father went back and forth arguing over details for several weeks before finally the new owners fired my father for insubordination. So now on to the revenge. There may be more to this, but I'm not entirely sure if it is just pro-revenge. It could border on nuclear based on what happened some years later, though I'm not certain that what happened later had anything to do with my father's actions. So after cleaning out his office and packing things in the trunk of his car, my father headed home and made a few phone calls. He must have gone through 8 or 9 different calls before he got in touch with someone who was interested in what he had to say. See, my dad was under no illusions that the company that had fired him was not gonna make those patented lockers on their own. He also knew that the company itself was relatively small. The owners had money and there was no way he could fight them. However, a larger company could. So then he contacted the major competitors and made them an offer. He eventually set up a meeting with some people, wheeled out the prototype he had made, explained how everything worked, and noted that with this system, the company could revolutionize the way lockers were both designed and improve both safety and security. What's more, as he was the only patent holder for the next 7 years or so, that company could be the only company to produce them. The competitor jumped at the chance and bought all patents both for the design and the process. They even paid my dad a substantial consultancy fee to go out to their manufacturing site and teach their crews how to make the needed tools and die sets to produce them. Less than 6 months after the first company had fired him, their #1 competitor was completely destroying them in the market with this new design. And there was not a damn thing the first company could do about it. Of course, they did try suing my father, claiming he had stolen their intellectual property, but that case quickly evaporated when they had to admit under oath that they had never actually signed a contract with him. And also there was no requirement that he turn over anything he created to the company. In the 7 years from when the second company bought the locker design and process patents, they pretty handily moved into markets that previously they had been unable to. The first company soldiered on, but by the time the patent had finally expired, they were a shadow of their former selves. The new owners had sold the company at a loss, with the competitor buying it only to shut that production facility down due to redundancy. Put maybe 200 people out of work, though given how they lost so much business, I wager that it was far less than that. So yeah, the new guys don't want to play ball, then threaten the guy that holds the patents on something they want to do, and then fire him, only to have him take everything to their competitor and effectively put them out of business. Added to answer some of the questions that have arisen, #1, you don't know what his degree level was? Well, my father and I had a difficult relationship. There are very few good memories I have of him, and it was not until shortly before his death in 2007 from a stroke that I really started to connect with him. I resented him for most all of my life because he was more career-minded than anything. I figure we moved some 10 times in 20 years and it greatly affected me. For a rather long period of time, I am ashamed to say, I hated my father and wanted nothing to do with him. Second, you must have ended up wealthy. Well, not really. Any money that Dad earned off his little endeavor was lost after an incident that left him disabled. Medical bills being what they are, by the end of it we were pretty much broke. 3. Patents last 20 years. Well, design patents don't. They last 14, but the courts have historically sided with companies infringing on design patents after 7 years, so as long as the infringing company develops their own method to produce whatever design is being used and modifies or changes it, it is fine. #4, what company was this? You know I cannot tell you that. Number 5. Any variation of how did the new owners not know? That answer is pure speculation on my part. However, I got the impression that the new owners were in their mid to late 20s and trying to act like investors. The company was on offer relatively cheap from what I know, but had a rather long history in the manufacturing field. And wow, Ripe Stars, I gotta say, that was a pretty fascinating revenge story that you don't see every day. However, I feel kind of bad for OP that he said he never really had a good relationship with his dad pretty much up until his death. I'm not exactly sure what his dad did wrong in life, and there probably have been issues, but at least judging by this story, he must have been at least some sort of legend. But then again, I don't really want to get involved in any sort of family drama of other people. I can just judge objectively what I see on Reddit. And with this, we have reached the end of the video. However, if you cannot get enough of my content, please check out my endless playlist, where you can find thousands of hours of content. In addition, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel to not miss any of my daily uploads. Thank you so much in advance, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.